This is a sheet of plywood. How long has it been around and what was it used for? Put your headphones on and buckle up because today we'll be talking about the diverse applications of plywood through history and its evolution. Let's start from the very beginning. Plywood, a versatile sheet stock material made from wood veneers and glue. When did humans come up with this technology and why? Archaeology reveals that plywood findings date back to the Djoser period in ancient Egypt. Yeah, we're going way back with this one. The interior of this alabaster chest was lined with 6 layers of wood veneer glued together in the same way we might find cross-bonded plywood today. Cross-bonding is the technology used to glue plywood together and make it as strong as possible by arranging the veneer directions perpendicular to each other. Now, Egypt wasn't exactly known for its forests, and the cost of transporting precious woods like ebony, cedar, and pine from East Africa and Lebanon were huge. And local species of juniper, acacia, and sycamore just didn't cut it. That's what forced Egyptians to think about how they could use poorer quality wood to yield the same result as precious woods. Although labor-intensive, hand sewing layers of wood and gluing them together with a collagen-rich glue allowed Egyptians to make the first forms of cabinetry and coffins from essentially the first form of plywood made from 3mm thick layers. And yeah, that glue was made from animal cartilage and bones. Maybe it smelled like soup. The rest of the world quickly picked up after Egypt, and China started showing its first signs of creating furniture and paper in the same method. And ancient Roman Greece learned quickly from their neighbors. There have been many attempts in both England and France to create further veneers for production. Much later, furnishing made by French artisans in the 15th and 16th century featured veneers made of mahogany and ebony, and while the quality of that veneer was leaving much to be desired, it was still cheaper than using whole precious woods. And so the middle-class bourgeoisie took that to their advantage. Skipping to the Industrial Revolution in Austria, the Munting brothers have finally made the kick to change plywood manufacturing forever. Imagine this behemoth of a machine, 6 meters long, 3 meters high. You needed 2 pedaling workers to power it. And you would think, wow, that's gonna make work so much easier than before. Wrong. About 25 to 50% of the wood processed through this thing turned into surplus. So how was that improved? Why do we think that plywood is sustainable now if so much surplus has been made from the first forms of plywood? French engineer Marc-Isambard Brunel, yes, the same Brunel that has built the Thames Tunnel, has taken that challenge into his hands and in 1806 created what we would now recognize as the first prototype of the modern planner. It worked perfectly on mahogany, but the moment that rosewood was in question, the prototype failed. Brunel abandoned his planner and instead tried to take a different approach. This time he used a segmented circular saw. The new machine was equipped with a 16-liter capacity steam engine, and it reached its peak when it was able to cut both mahogany and rosewood into veneers that were 1/16 of an inch thick. Most of the UK has employed Brunel's saws from that moment on. The only setback? This machine's feed rate didn't exceed 1/4 foot per second. After many engineers have attempted to perfect the manufacturing of plywood in Europe, a report published in Britain in 1817 has revealed that an inventor from St. Petersburg has made a machine that could cut plywood 100 feet long and 3, 4, or 5 more wide. How is that possible? Instead of moving planks of wood through a planer, a log was rotated and a knife was brought to the center of its axis to shave off veneers of wood. Strangely enough, Henry Favre had a very similar machine patented in 1818, and this machine was quickly replicated in America and called an improved steam-powered rotary veneer cutter in Philadelphia, 1825. The Penny Cyclopedia from 1843 describes veneer cutting from the same methods used in Russia, where a sheet was 100 feet long and cut in 3 minutes. Rotary cutting was still therefore the most efficient and sustainable way for manufacturing veneers, and any machine developments afterwards followed the same concept. Modern-day lathes are essentially identical to the designs made in the mid-19th century, but there was still one issue. The veneer splintered during processing. This required a lot of patching, and plywood made from these veneers would be prone to a lot of defects. So, how is that solved? Plywood mills today use a process called hydrothermal treatment, wherein the logs are soaked in water of a specific temperature to make them more flexible and pliable. Although it affected the color of the veneer, it allowed for minimal splintering when the logs were put on a rotary cutter and stripped. To this day, it's still debated who the real innovator of this treatment is. It is believed that the real patent for plywood manufacturing as we know it today was given to John K. Mayo in 1865, but his patent is given away to time because he didn't try to gain commercial benefit from it. Is he a poor salesman or a service to the world? Disputes on the quality of veneer obtained from various methods continued in the second half of the 19th century, and as the Industrial Revolution came around, the quality of the plywood made then has significantly increased while the cost of it has decreased. So this has inspired joiners and inventors to think of other applications for plywood. Surprisingly bold, even for us today. The idea to build a pneumatic elevated subway in New York came to the mind of a very wealthy businessman and inventor, Alfred Eli Beach. Think of him as the Elon Musk of his time. He planned to stretch a suspension road throughout the city, either attached to the walls of buildings or on column supports. A 107-foot prototype of a molded plywood tube road was displayed in 1867 at the Great Exhibition Hall of the American Institute in New York. Giant fans installed at both ends of this tube created enough airflow to allow visitors of the exhibition to ride inside of the tube using a cylindrical trailer, also made of plywood, to go back and forward and accommodating around 10 passengers at a time. And that's crazy to think about now, given the kind of systems that we're using to make our subways. Then again, we're also traveling longer distances. What do you think? And this is only one of the ways plywood was used in transport, and we'll be going over that further in this essay. But first, let's go back to the history of manufacturing plywood. The horizontal planer method of manufacturing plywood was reintroduced in 1875 by Louis Arbet, and despite all of Brunel's efforts, it still outperformed by making veneers that were 1/100th of an inch thick, and the finish was so smooth that no sanding was required. Talk about some friendly competition. For a while, the craze with plywood has settled, and we don't hear of any big advancements until the 1900s, which was greatly facilitated by the 1905 World's Fair in Portland, USA. One of the first US plywood factories, Portland Manufacturing, was also located in the city. The owner of the plant, Gustav Carlson, has made several samples of plywood from local softwoods, using paint brushes to apply the glue and car jacks to press the veneers together. This has raised a lot of interest among manufacturers of cars, trucks, doors, and just builders in general. And so the manufacturing process has changed. 2 years later, orders began to flood in, and the company has finally installed a glue spreader and a hand press. This raised production to 420 sheets per day. The strength and lightness of this material made it possible to manufacture fundamentally new and progressive designs of aircrafts for that time. As early as the 1910s, pioneering experiments with molded plywood allowed us to build what we would now know as a monocoque aircraft fuselage. And for those of you who don't know, monocoque means single-shelled. Molded plywood is plywood that is bent and shaped through the use of heat, steam, and pressure in order to soften the product, but also keep it intact so when it cools down, it retains the shape that it's been pressed into. The monocoque fuselage consisted of an outer shell of plywood, the shape of which was held together by internal transverse bulkheads. It had a smooth, streamlined shape that was characterized by its strength, rigidity, and lightness. French engineer Louis Becquerel first used plywood in the fuselage of the Deperdessin racing monoplane in 1911. Since then, plywood became the hero component of aircraft manufacturing for World War I planes such as the Blériot Spat or the Albatross D3. Domestic engineers of the USSR also used plywood in their innovative plane designs when aluminium wasn't readily available due to shortages. In 1928, at the Leningrad Institute of Railway Engineers, a student aircraft club led by VF Rental has made the initiative to create a plane entirely made out of plywood. The widespread use of plywood in construction has inspired the students to create what they would then call Plywood 1, 2, 3, built in a small series. These aircrafts were successfully launched on the Aeroflot local lines, on the Far East, and even in the Arctic in 1933. Later, plywood would also be used for infamous planes in World War II, like the de Havilland Mosquito DH-98. This plane was so lightweight and it was so fast that it didn't have any defense systems installed on it because it was that much faster than the German Air Force. How crazy is that? And the best part is that this plane was made by unskilled labor from the UK, Canada, and Australia. This is why you should never underestimate a tradie's abilities to make absolutely anything his mind gets up to. If the de Havilland Mosquito wasn't enough for you, then there's Spruce Goose. Yes, we're talking about the Hercules H-4. This 134-ton aircraft was the biggest of its time, developed by Howard Hughes in 1947. And despite the name, it's actually not made of spruce, it's made of birch plywood. Although it's not as big as the AN-225 Maria, which is now counted as the biggest aircraft ever, it is still the biggest flying boat ever made. Now, disclaimer, the Hughes H-4 Hercules is taller and it has a much bigger wingspan than the Antonov Maria, but it is paling in comparison to the length. Alright, well, what did we go over? We went over planes, we went over furniture. What's next? Cars? Uh-huh. But before I get into plywood cars, did you know plywood was actually used by none other than Ernest Shackleton in the Nimrod Antarctic expedition of 1907? He ordered over 2,500 boxes made of plywood for the transportation of provisions and tools, and he wasn't doing so. Those very same boxes he was able to use to make furniture, and even the bookbinder for his book Aurora Australis. I just wanted to put that out there. But okay, let's go back on track.